Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio. Hello, Rocky Mountains, Montana, and all the way to New Mexico and Nebraska, all the way to Utah. KGAB, AM 650, Cheyenne, the Town Square Network. 101 Easy out of Colorado Springs, and 780 AM, The Monster out of Denver. I got a great show for you guys today. You know, although since I'm not biased, I'll tell you, they're all great shows, right? All you folks are listening to them in the archives and on Saturdays. But today I have a unique show. And the gentleman that's on the line with me, I'm going to introduce him here in just a moment, is Xander Riata. He runs a website. It's called Full Spectrum Dominance. It's full-spectrum-dominance.com. And let me tell you, it is incredible. He has news feeds from all over the world. I mean, really terrific stories that you absolutely, positively, no way are going to see in the media in this country, and for that matter, any normal media, if there is such a thing, in any country. And he follows all sorts of things. And, you know, we've been talking for the last 2.5 years together about what's happening. We get into Europe and we get into international things, and we've had international experts on and all that kind of fun stuff. However, I want you to understand that the trials and travails that we are going through in this country right now, on many different levels, you know, all the way from the economy to the big boot of society and the government on the common man and the middle class, to wealth redistribution, to social justice, to this incredible intentional division by race and incitement to violence by folks who are by the folks who said there's no red states, there's no blue states, there's only the United States. We know who said that. And I want to tie that in for you through Xander over the global situation, because I want you to understand that what's happening in the United States, which is kind of the Alamo of freedom, is intentional. It's on purpose. It's part of a plan. And the United States and where they want to bring this country is part of a much bigger plan which encompasses the world. And Xander, I'm going to call him X. It's easy. X is going to acquaint you with what's happening on a global basis that's affecting your everyday life and will absolutely, positively, without fail, affect your children's future. You need to be aware of the big picture. The United States, although the most important micro picture, is still a micro picture. X, welcome to the show.
Hello, Reid. Thank you for having me on the program today.
Oh, listen, it's our treat and honor to have you, and absolutely delighted. And first of all, tell us briefly, give us a little history. I mean, how did you get into it? How did you set up this incredible site that you have, Full Spectrum Dominance? And am I right, there's like 40 to 50 million hits a month on that site?
Correct. As of right now, FSD gets over 40 million average a month and growing, and depending on the time of the year of what's happening, it can get over 60 million hits a month, and that's continuing to balloon. I originally created this open source docking station for free information in 2008 as I was in extended rehab for injuries I received on active duty in the United States Marine Corps in 2006. And I used it. What's that?
I said thank you for your service.
Oh, no problem. It's one of those things where I came from a long line of professional military men. I try to do the same thing. I was raised to believe it was about the Constitution. And unfortunately, as many of my peers in past generations have come to find out, that war is a racket, war is hell. In actuality, it's no longer about the Constitution, but about making money. And I look back on it now, and my family looks back on it, and it seems as though it was kind of a blessing that I was hurt so that I wouldn't have to be in the continued circle of redeployment after redeployment. With that said, FSD was created by me as a means of therapy, mental therapy, as I saw a lot of my fellow Marines as well as guys in other branches deal with substance abuse, self-mutilation, suicide, domestic violence, all sorts of problems due to the frustration of the military medical treatment apparatus. I got my mind away from that stuff as my body was broken and destroyed, all the surgeries I've had to go through. I did this. I interlinked with people from all over the world, all different languages and cultures and religions, just as pen pals, to get their perspective, to learn more about this planet that we live on. And it was just originally a hobby in 2008, and now it's turned into something that is constantly featured on national as well as international media circuits. So we're at that point now.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me. Folks, I really recommend you take a look at this site. But it's fascinating to me how much news and how unusual but absolutely relevant the news is that's streaming in from every quadrant of the planet. I mean, it's really remarkable. I was stunned the first time I visited your site. So, you kind of heard my introduction of you up front, and we know what's going on in this country. I mean, there's a long list, and folks can go back into my archives, and I have a show on, or more than one, on about every imaginable dark, sinister spear that's being thrown at the Constitution, at our values, at our lifestyles, at our economy. But in our pre-interview, you really struck a chord when you said, this is just one little piece of a big pie. The most important piece for what the globalists want to get done, but still one little piece. Tell us a little bit about that. Maybe what you could do is start a little bit with, how history has kind of shaped it, and then there's geopolitical and economic influences which enter into it. You mentioned, the almighty money. And then, you have a really interesting theory on the anthropology of it all and how it all mixes in and how these puppet masters are so adept at steering the courses of people's minds, populations' minds, and, of course, dancing, making world leaders dance at the end of their little puppet strings. It's fascinating. Go ahead.
As one of my contacts in the Philippines always says, the only people in the world that do not know about what goes on inside America are Americans themselves. And it has been designed that way over many, many, many decades. The bread and circuses of the Roman Empire to keep the plebeian class in line, dazed and confused, so that they do not worry about the sinister nature of backdoor dealings in the Roman Senate and the wishes of the megalomaniac emperors. All of those things from the past are what is going on now in the present. We are seeing in the Western world the decline of the post-World War II prosperity. And the power brokers, different factions within them, are behind schedule on the implementation of certain agendas. The more technology you have, the faster you acquire technology. Your perception and your reality of what's going on, your opinion, doesn't matter. The only thing that does matter are historical trends. Before the age of exploration, the colonization of the New World, before this occurred, the descendants of Europa were in the Middle Ages. They were in squalor, while the power rested in the East. Before the Arab caliphates came to power, before the Byzantine Empire faded away into obscurity.
Give people so they understand how that ancient history affects us today, just give them a couple of years. In other words, put it in a time frame for them.
We have power in the West now. Before this, power in the East. Before that, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, and Alexander the Great, power in the West. Before that, we had power in the East, the cradle of civilization, Egypt, and obviously the ancient Indian and Chinese empires. Next coming up is the re-emergence of the superpowers of the East. And this plays in economics with China and with India. Why these things are relevant, as they should be relevant to Americans, Canadians, and all Westerners, is that the tyranny and the depressed status of the caste systems of society in the third world, in the East, should act as a visual example of what is now taking place as we speak. Today, the city of Detroit filed for bankruptcy, the largest city so far in the U.S. to do so.
That's right. And let me interject. Folks, I have 2 shows on Detroit, in the corruption of America. Is I believe, the name of the show. Go in the archives and listen to it. I predicted what happened today over a year and a half ago, and of course everybody laughed at me. Listen to that show. 2 plus 2 is 4. Excuse me, X. Go ahead.
Well, no problem. If you were one of the lower IQ persuasion that believed everything the corporate media establishment told you, then 2 plus 2 is 0.
Or 5.
Obviously, the public education system that indoctrinates the youth of this nation, they are making the lowest common denominator being elevated to the status of merit for advancement through society. This is not what formed America to be the most successful country in the world since Rome. Everything used to be based on merit. We used to have a meritocracy. The strong, the righteous, the literate, the kind, the patient, they were the ones that were the leaders.
And by the way, folks, once again, X, I'm going to interject just for a moment. If you guys get a chance, you folks listening, remember this and Google it up. It'll take you 5 minutes to read it. You'll understand exactly what meritocracy is. Just Google up Jefferson's Meritocracy. Thomas Jefferson wrote an entire treatise on it. It's only a few pages long. When you get through reading it, a big light bulb will blink. Excuse me, X. Go ahead.
Thomas Jefferson was on a stupid man. He was on a stupid man because he couldn't afford to be a stupid man. He was a property owner. You yourself, you were a landowner. You understand the responsibility and the hardships of maintaining land and providing jobs to others who, as you rely on your land to survive, others whom you utilize and employ to maintain that land rely on you to survive. It's the symbiotic relationship that a true free market society is supposed to have, but we're no longer a free market society. The things overseas, as FullSpectrumDominance.com is a very, very large international source for media. Again, I want the listeners to really take this home about paying attention to what others around the planet are currently going through and what they have gone through, because that's all coming here to the U.S. The Western world has abandoned everything that made it great. The Easterners have not abandoned everything that made them powerful. Not necessarily great, but powerful. China has been a cohesive civilization for 5,000 years. India has been a cohesive civilization for over 4,000 years. Now, India's population is 1.2 billion and growing. They do not have a one-child policy. China's population is 1.3 billion and growing, and they do have a one-child policy. It's exponential. The reason why this will matter to Americans is because as land, as property, is no longer available in these third world localities, those governments are sending their citizens, their people, to Western lands as economic operatives to buy a business, to flood the universities, to learn the secrets of how Western society works, how Western industry works.
And in addition, those burgeoning populations need more resources. They need more energy. They need more food. They need more products.
Over 70% of Australia is technically owned by the Communist Chinese Politburo. Many Australians do not know this. The ones that I'm connected with do. There are many radio shows like yours, Reid, in Australia, in New Zealand, that are talking about the same things, with the same passion, with the same amount of shock and awe. Okay, it's interesting to compare the Aborigines down under with the American Indians here, because they've gone through the same things. Okay, and you have the weak-minded that are exploiting the fact that we are not a homogeneous society to turn everyone against each other. Whereas in the olden days, when Australia was colonized, when New Zealand was colonized, it was all about survival of the fittest. You had Europeans showing up with superior technology. They conquered a people that were primitive. They were Stone Age people. The same thing happened in the United States and Canada. Okay, and this is part of human nature. What's very dangerous at the moment?
But nonetheless, I do want to interject. In my personal opinion, I think it's a dark stain on the pages of history of those countries, including the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What has occurred in the past cannot be changed.
No.
And it should not be changed, even if it could, because it's all part of humanity's destiny, our voyage and adventure through the cosmos of the Almighty's plan for us. And everything is linked back to warfare. Warfare is what gives you the comforts of medical treatment, the comforts of entertainment, the comforts of the availability of security, and you have your electronic devices, you have your automobiles, you have all of this because of warfare. All innovations throughout human history come out of violent conflict. It's a necessity. New things have to be invented to give you an advantage over a rival clan, a rival tribe, as well as help you to maintain your ability to make it through nature's assaults against biological life on the planet.
And by the way, that kind of strikes me, and it struck me in our pre-interview too, X. You liken the nations on Earth, the religions, the cultures, the creeds, to tribes. And that resonated with me, because it is so true. In the end, if everybody takes their thumb who's listening to this show, you put it in your mouth and press against that pointed tooth there in the corner, the upper right-hand or upper left-hand corner of your mouth, those are incisors. Only predators have them. It's 1 million years of evolution. And it really kind of ties into the tribe. It ties into the basic concept of human nature that you're talking about.
Definitely. People in the West have forgotten. Virtually no one in the Western world understands anymore that your family lineage, your ancestors' business contracts, their verbal and written agreements with other parties actually still applies to you, even though those that came before have long since passed on. In the Arab world and the Middle East, these people over there, they are very, very protective of their inherited land. For example, in Iraq, the Bedouin tribes there, they know exactly how many acres, how many hectares of land was given to them by the Caliph or by the Turk many centuries ago. And those borders are known by the residents of a certain area of Iraq. But Iraq itself, as Syria, These are made-up, segregated provinces of the British Empire due to the late 19th century.
Yeah, they're geopolitical concoctions.
Before that, all that area was Persia. Before that, all that area belonged to the Hittites, to the Phoenicians, to the Babylonians, to the Akkadians. It's all recycled. Everything is recycled. There are no more Hittites. There are no more Akkadians, Phoenicians, Babylonians. There are still Persians genetically, absolutely, in Iran. They may not be Zoroastrians, as their ancestors were in the time of Cyrus the Great. They are now Shiite Muslims. But in Iran, they still understand, due to their cultural values, the history that they teach their children, that Iraq is Persia, that Syria is Persia. And these engagements happening over there in that part of the world are ongoing. They will not be resolved. They'll never be resolved. People are never, ever going to stop killing each other. And these racial and religious hatreds are at a point now where they are no longer isolated by vast mountain ranges, forests, oceans, seas, and rivers. Because of the airplane, because of safe sea travel, because of open borders by the Western world.
And because of ballistic missiles.
Right. These third world illiterate populations that have access to certain resources that they can sell to a hungry and starving industrialized West gives them the political power through economic power to impose their way on us. We're letting that happen, of course. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm going to offer up what Americans can expect to happen here in the We need to...
And, you know, before you do that, we're going to take a break, but there's 3 specific questions I want to ask you, and then I want to get into this, what we can expect here, based on history, based on the theory of tribalism, and based on the manipulation of, as you call it, low IQ minds by masterful puppeteers. And the first thing I want to ask you is, do you think there's a chance that the East could split itself up? You know, India and China being the 2 most populous nations, as we've discussed so far. China, of course, just launched its first aircraft carrier. It has huge aspirations for controlling the naval waters over there between it and Australia, around Japan, and, of course, in the China Sea, which would affect India. India just purchased its first aircraft carrier from Russia, which is kind of interesting. And both of them, of course, are nuclear powers, and neither of them like each other. Then, of course, you have the tribal fighting that is ongoing. You can see it even in the American media, you know, bombs, etc., in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, etc., between Shiite Muslims and Sunni Muslims. Is it possible that the ascendancy of the East, which, by the way, I agree with, can be slowed because of this fractionalization within that, shall we say, global power structure?
No. This is why. You ready?
Yep.
Because Westerners don't breed. That's what it boils down to. This is a topic that makes people uncomfortable. Whatever. It needs to be discussed. I've been around the world. I know how these people think. I see what they do to each other. They breed. Human life in the Eastern mind does not have the value as it would in the Western mind. In the East, women are property. In the East, children are property. They're property. There is no basis for human rights in the East. It doesn't exist. It never has and never will. General MacArthur told us that after Japan was defeated. He had to play the political tightrope walking game. He understood that if something happened to the emperor, who the Japanese people thought literally was a god, that there would be mass insurgency, guerrilla warfare tactics, as we're seeing now in the Middle East since the late 1960s. See, MacArthur understood. He understood because he was the governor of the Philippines even before the war started. In order to truly understand the pyramids, you have to go there and touch them. In order for one to really grasp the glory of Rome's past and to learn from its mistakes, you have to go to Rome and walk through the Great Forum, touch the Colosseum. But that Colosseum is a symbol. That was what Rome was all about, at least in the imperial times, was sport, was drunkenness and debauchery.
Well, the bottom line is the Roman powers that be, as Rome began its decline, offered up as opiates, number one, social welfare, and number two, great sporting events in the Colosseums, the gladiators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I kind of liken that, even though people are going to grimace at this, particularly you guys in Colorado who are Broncos fans. But you know what? Football is the opiate of the masses, folks. Big-time sports, not only is it a moneymaker for the people who are in it, but it is condoned and sanctioned by the government. I really believe this. To get our minds off of, to divert us from what is truly important.
Correct. And the East doesn't value these spectacles. They don't care. The East is a caste system. You have the power at the top, and everyone else fights over the scraps. It's never going to change. And the East, although there are many different cultures with money and power, and now, unfortunately, they have the possession of nuclear weapons. Most, as in the case of India and Pakistan, would be only at the fission level. They don't have any thermonuclear hydrogen-based weapon systems online. China does. China is working on the MIRV technology. MIRV stands for Multiple Independent Reentry Vehicle. This is 50s technology.
Which America developed. By the way, interesting sidelight, folks, General MacArthur was removed at the end of the Korean conflict because he advocated strongly invading China.
Yes.
I mean, he understood what was coming because of the knowledge he had gained as a governor of the Philippines and in the Pacific Theater. He understood that eventually China would be our enemy.
Yes. China thinks 100 years, 1,000 years ahead. That's just the way they are, okay, because they're very patient. And all the technology...
Along those lines, X, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was fascinated when you told me, because I did not know this, and I have since found information which absolutely supports what you told me. But so we're in Iraq and spending our blood and treasure, and we're in Afghanistan spending our blood and treasure, and it's my understanding that somewhere between 70 and 80% of Iraq's oil is now going to China.
Yes.
And that China has entered into agreements encompassing almost 70% of Afghanistan for rare earth minerals and other resource explorations.
Yes.
I mean, that's... people, I want you to think about this. We're over there spending lives, American lives, and spending American treasure, monies, and we're pulling out, and behind our backs, the Chinese are taking, I can only call it, the spoils.
Yes.
How stupid are we?
Well, the U.S. military is at war. America is at the mall. That's what it's all about. Cicero, one of Rome's last...
Or at the football game.
Right. Well, Cicero, one of Rome's last great philosophers and statesmen, said that the average Roman is only just to paraphrase, is only concerned about the pebble in his shoe, not the dealings of the legions on the frontier.
Yeah, great quote.
And
great quote.
That's relevant today.
We're going to pause here for a station ID and a quick commercial, and when we come back, because that quote is just a perfect place to end it, I want you to tell the audience what your opinion is in store for America, based on what's happening globally, and who's behind it.
Well,
sound like a plan?
Sure.
All right,
great.
Super.
No problem.
Folks, we will be right back. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio, and I am talking to Xander Del Riata, and it's a fascinating discussion for me, and I know for you too, because this is all sorts of new info that we have not delved into that we really need to. KGAB AM 650, the Town Square Network, Easy 101 Colorado Springs, and Denver 780. We will be right back.
Land. For love and money, the beauty of the land provokes something primal. It fills us with awe and makes us yearn for land of our own. My land. Those words evoke a sense of security and a place in the world. Yet the word land also evokes nitty-gritty financial issues, business, improvement, taxes, profit. In Volume 1 of Land for Love and Money, rancher Reid Lance Rosenthal uses his award-winning style to tell us real stories, the hard-hitting truth your banker forgot to tell you about all types, sizes, and locations of land. For those drawn to land purchase, ownership, management, preservation, and sale in good times and in bad. Reid's intense love of the land, his devotion to wild and remote places, and his extensive experience with land purchase and sale throughout 2 continents make him uniquely qualified to write Land for Love and Money. A bestseller already, Land for Love and Money is available at landforloveandmoney.com, Barnes & Noble, Hastings, Amazon, and fine bookstores everywhere.
Welcome back, folks. Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side. Hope you're having a good Saturday. We have Xander Del Riata from FullSpectrumDominance.com. And let me tell you, you got to visit this website. It is fascinating. I mean, it's flat fascinating. It is a news feed from the planet. This is not a news feed like Reuters or a news feed like you go to Fox News or you go to CBS. I mean, this is from the planet. It is, you could spend hours on it. I mean, it's just riveting. So when we left, we kind of ended with a great quote, which is, the common Roman was more concerned with a pebble in his shoe than the legions on the frontier. And where I want to go with that is, since unfortunately many Americans are in the same mindset, we don't understand what's happening in our own country, and we sure as hell don't understand how it all fits into a global scheme that's evolving right now. I want X to tell us what he sees based on his history, based on his worldwide contacts, and based on kind of the inevitability of 2 + 2 is 4, what he sees for America in the next 40 years. X, you got the stage.
People need to really take the time to research the history of what has occurred in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, what has happened in Zambia, as well as South Africa, because America is going to be like South Africa very soon, but on a much larger scale. When the educated classes are told by corporatist government that they are no longer allowed to reap the benefits of what they sow.
That's called wealth redistribution, folks.
Correct.
That's called spreading the wealth. Who have we heard use those words? Go ahead, X.
Well, there's a lot of evildoers that use those words.
Yeah, but we have one head honcho evildoer in this country.
Well, the emperor, the emperor in the ivory house is a puppet, and he gets away with accomplishing his mission for his bosses that belong to the ancient mystery schools, because he's able to use a teleprompter that conveys nothing but gibberish to a bunch of drones, which is the American population. I mean, people can't hear. There's a difference between listening and hearing. And when the European whites in Rhodesia and Zambia and South Africa during the Bush Wars told the UN, the United States, and Europe that we have Soviet and Chinese-backed elements from all over Africa invading our borders, killing our livestock, killing our ranchers, kidnapping our daughters and selling them into slavery to the Saudi royal family, to the sheiks in Abu Dhabi and Qatar and Bahrain and all these places. America yawned. Just as America yawned when the white Europeans in Vietnam, the French, who cultivated the land, who set up industry, who created an economy for France, who gave medical care to a third world population that never had any before the French showed up. America yawned. Because, Reid, it's money. Everything is about money. South Africa, Rhodesia were destroyed. The white Europeans were driven out because somebody way up the chain made a buck. The whole racial elements to what has happened in Southern Africa is a big whitewash. Ha ha. You see what I did there? Blacks as well as whites fought and died side by side together in the Rhodesian Defense Forces, in the South African Defense Forces to fight communism. Just like Far East Oriental people, Vietnamese men, fought and died alongside French, white European men against communism. America abandoned them. Just like in 1974, 1975, we pulled out of Nam. We left all those people to be butchered. Because it's the bottom line. It's the money. America is being bled dry. We are being used to carry out the military dealings of the international banking cartel. And warfare by nation states is now obsolete. Regulars such as myself, when I was on active duty in the service, are no longer needed. There's always been mercenaries, absolutely. During the Middle Ages, the primary fighting forces of Europe were paid mercenaries. There wasn't a nation state at that time. The nation state as we know it now is a new concept formed during the 1800s. Before then, everything was city-states. It was fiefdoms. Okay? With the exceptions of every few centuries, you would have massive empires. But even then, with the centralization of power, you had to pass out authority and the ability to collect taxes and distribute money amongst auxiliary subsidiary chieftains. So these things concerning history and economics and warfare are tying into what I'm going to get at here. I mentioned earlier when you asked me about is the East going to break up, I said no. Why aren't they going to break up? Answer, because the West is dying, because Western people, when I say Western people, this involves Canada, the United States, Europe, Russia, Israel, Australia, and New Zealand.
Where does South America fall into the?
Well, South America is not part of the West. South America is its own thing. South America is largely most places in Central and South America are still on the 19th century, 18th century colonial power structure. It's just no longer Spain and Portugal calling the shots. It's these local banana republics. Brazil, which is one of the BRIC nations, BRICS stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and soon Turkey is going to join the BRIC economic bloc, which acts as a challenge to Western economic dominance.
And by the way, who's one of their primary motives is to replace the dollar as the world currency.
Yes, correct. China announced last month, and they're doing more discussions with releasing reports and papers from the Politburo today, as I speak, about backing yuan partially in gold within the next couple of years.
Which is why they have been huge buyers of gold over the last 4, 5, 6 years particularly. It's why the Chinese people love and revere gold. You can watch streaming video of people lined up out gold shops in all sorts of Chinese cities, folks. And listen, if you are another country, you're not in the BRICS, you're not kind of in the, shall we say, the European mix, which I'll put America into for right now for this discussion, and you want a currency that you know is not going to devalue with inflation and all sorts of other things, conflict, are you going to go for a currency? Are you going to trade in a currency that's backed by gold, i.e. the yuan in China? Or are you going to use a currency which is backed by a printing press, i.e. the U.S. dollar? Boy, that's not a hard decision, is it?
Well, it's a hard decision for people who are affected by SFB syndrome, which is a funny acronym we used in the Marine Corps. SFB syndrome stands for Scheiße for brains, and some people will understand what I'm getting at there. The Easterners, like the Chinese, aren't affected by that. Don't get me wrong, okay? China has a lot of problems. They're still 20 years behind where they need to be to actually physically move on a military front to back their political and economic motions to kick out the dollar from that part of the world. Okay, China is still very, very weak in a lot of regards. You mentioned them starting to put to sea carrier strike battle groups, as it reported on FullSpectrumDominance.com a couple of days ago. And reminder to your listeners, make sure you put dashes in between each of the words to the web address.
Right.
China has announced
dominance-spectrum.com.
Correct. China has announced that they're going to be breaking ground soon for a whole new naval base that they plan to host 4 complete carrier strike battle groups at.
Well, they're building the docks right now.
Yes, and before, and still, China's very wise. They build a lot of their new test systems up the Yangtze and Yellow River in the middle of their country because they understand it's a lot harder for Western espionage to get at that infrastructure inland than it would be using frogmen on the coastal regions by sea. Right. So, a lot of these things, they're kind of overwhelming people.
But you agree with me that the dollar is headed for collapse.
Oh, the dollar is definitely heading for a crash. The financial terrorist, Benjamin Bernanke, at the private Federal Reserve Incorporated, the last couple of days has been talking about stopping the printing presses. Well, if we do that, then the economy will crash. Read between the lines is what he's trying to get at. Because he's a hostage himself, as is other people in the economic and political structure. The ones that are pulling the strings actually don't know they're pulling the strings because even they themselves are controlled. Things are so compartmentalized now. Things are so far down the rabbit hole that it's all a blur.
Well, sure. It's a blur of spears being thrown at the Constitution, our values, our way of life, and I think in the end, perhaps, our very existence, certainly an existence as a free people. And that's that is that staccato, that continuing drum roll now of one crisis and one scandal after another, after another, after another, after another. this is such a fascinating topic, and we've wandered a little bit, but it all ties in. We got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to keep my mouth shut, which is difficult, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm going to let you tell us, I'm going to bring us back to where we started after the break. Where is America 40 years from now?
America is going to be divided up in between different city-states. America is going to have a European descent population, possibly under 20%. The Mesoamerican population is going to be dominant in not only the Southwest, but the west of the U.S. and Canada, as well as the South. The areas around the Great Lakes are all going to collapse, as Detroit is doing so now. New York City and the Eastern Starboard area, concerning Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, places such as these, there is so much power tied in to that area with the financial sector in London, which I'll put it this way, bluntly, London is the seat of the Antichrist. London has more financial corruption going on in it than all the other places of the world combined. I want the people listening to this to get something through their head. America is owned by the British. America went back to English rule after the end of the Great War between the states. You have not been a citizen since 1860. You are a consumer. You are controlled. The reason why you are controlled is because there's over 400 million privately owned weapons in this country, and you're not using them to protect yourself from illegal aliens that come across the border and kill you and your family and kill your animals and drive you off your land. You're not using that power to use the principles of secession and bringing towards citizen arrest of those guilty of treason in the District of Criminals. The pen really is mightier than the sword. China does not have to attack the United States militarily now or even 60 years from now. All China has to do is say, I am not going to be playing your game anymore. You need my cheap products to keep your fat and lazy consumer populace satisfied. Within 20 years, China will be at the point where they don't need to export as much as they do now to us. The Southwest and California will be part of Mexico again very shortly. Those that are middle class and have money that are unable to leave the country and obtain second and tertiary passports to the Southern Hemisphere, they're moving towards the areas of the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, northern Utah. That's where they're going, because that's going to be a safe haven due to low population density, lots of arable land, many conservative-minded, free market Christian people live there with traditional family values. It's going to be safe for those middle-class people, as well as lower echelon aristocratic Americans to move there to escape what's going to happen. Economic collapse is inevitable. Is it going to happen now or tomorrow? Absolutely not. Is it going to happen 10 years from now? I don't know. Probably not. But when we're moving towards the 2040s and the 2050s, and especially 2065 at the latest, the human population is going to be so big, so humongous,
and so lopsided,
it's going to implode. We're at over 7 billion people now globally. We're going to be at over 9 billion people by 2040. Okay, and as Westerners, as the descendants of Europa, as white people around the world die out slowly due to interracial breeding, as well as not breeding amongst themselves whatsoever. Don't even get me started on the abortion factor. It's insanity. It's eugenics. Eugenics is part of the plan. Population control is the name of the game. And until America is fully destroyed socially and economically, the United Earth Directorate, which is these NGOs or these non-governmental organizations are throwing around now since the late 90s, the United Earth Directorate, which is their hope to be there in place in the 22nd century, won't come until the human population is reduced dramatically, either slowly as what is being done now, or through a purposeful, blunt eradication of the herd, or, as we know, the globalists are extremely arrogant and they're all insane. Mother Nature just might take care of the job for them. Either way, Americans have to look at what has occurred in Southern Africa, what has occurred in the Balkans, what has occurred in Southeast Asia. They have to look at all those things. They have to learn about it. They have to get schooled on it, as I am, so that they can protect themselves and the people that they care about to survive the eventual decay, the decline, the fall, and the splintering of the United States into subcategory fiefdoms, because modern feudalism is just technocracy. They stole people's money outright from their banking accounts in Cyprus the beginning of this year. Greece is not resolved.
Yep, folks, shows in the archives. You can. Yeah, I was talking about it a year ago. Talked about Cyprus. Talked about Greece. Anyway, check it out.
Individuals have the power to take care of themselves and get themselves to safety. Because how are you going to be able to help anyone else if you can't help yourself? Don't get caught up in the words of the day, in the stories of the day, in the false narrative of what truly matters. You have to get out of debt. You have to start your own form of money gathering. Learn how to offer a product or a service that there is a market demand for, even if that market is not necessarily within your own country. Globalism is good in certain ways and bad in a lot of other ways. You need to figure out what works and what doesn't work.
And I'm going to interject. Your analogy there of, make sure that you are set and then help your neighbors, your community be set, is kind of like, folks, when you're in an airplane, what do they tell you? If there's a problem, first put on your own oxygen mask and then help everybody around you. It's the same exact concept. And the other thing I hear you saying, X, you didn't quite say it, but I feel it, I hear it, is that what made the society great, what we've escaped from, that vision, that ambition, that self-reliance, that individualism, is in the end going to be the saving graces of the people who figured this out.
Mm-hmm. Well, in order to appreciate freedom, in order to obtain liberty, you first must be a slave. Americans and Westerners will never do what is necessary to restore liberty in our lifetime until they are starving. The Egyptians are in the streets. The Syrians are fighting an internal war. The Serbs are continuing to push back and protest to prevent the European Union's absorption of Serbia and eventual destruction of the Serbian people. The West has already gotten away with doing so against the destruction of, Yugoslavia, the Balkans War. The Serbs were defending themselves against the same people that we're supposedly fighting now in Afghanistan. And Slick Willie decides, well, in order to get the heat off my back for old Monica, I'm going to go and attack a people in a part of the world that I know nothing about, and of which they never attacked another part of NATO. So it was an illegal war, but since when does any government care about what is legal and is illegal? They never have, because the population doesn't care themselves.
And less so now. And we are unfortunately out of time. I'm going to have you back, X, because I want to talk a little bit about the Earth Directorate. I want people to understand what that is. Right now it's kind of a fuzzy term that you threw out in this show. But it's important that people understand. I think you gave people a great kind of foundation today. Mm-hmm. The next Definitely. Show, I want you to tell them who and how. That's what we're going to do when I have you back here in the next couple of weeks. And I want to thank you very much for being on. Folks, again, full-spectrum-dominance.com. Check it out. Check out my archives on therightsideradio.com. A lot of things we talked about, there were shows on them a year or 2 years ago, kind of forewarning what you are reading in the papers today. And X gave us a great, well, I wouldn't call it great, shall we say a sobering analysis of what we might expect in the future. X, thanks very much for being on.
No problem. Thank you very much.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side. Have a great Saturday. Think, folks. Think.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, An American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's ontherightsideradio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.